I had been living in the city for about 6 months when I decided it was time to find a roommate to help with the rent. That's when I met Anna. She responded to my ad almost immediately, and we quickly arranged to meet. Anna seemed perfect. She was friendly, had a steady job, and came across as a calm, collected person. Our first meeting was at a cozy little cafe near my apartment. Anna was in her late 20s, with short, dark hair and warm brown eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She had an easygoing demeanor that put me at ease right away. We chatted about our interests, work, and the usual roommate logistics. She mentioned she worked as a graphic designer for a local firm and had moved to the city for a fresh start. By the end of our conversation, I felt confident that Anna would be a great fit. Anna moved in the following week, and our daily routines blended seamlessly. We shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The apartment was cozy, with a small living room where we often watched movies together, a kitchen where we occasionally cooked meals, and our separate bedrooms for privacy. In the beginning, everything was normal, almost idyllic. Anna was tidy and respectful, always cleaning up after herself and often leaving little notes with smiley faces and positive messages around the apartment. She was considerate and friendly, often asking about my day and sharing stories about her own. We quickly developed a comfortable rhythm, and it felt like living with an old friend rather than someone I had just met. Our interactions were mostly pleasant and lighthearted. Anna had a quirky sense of humor that always managed to lift my spirits after a long day at work. We'd spend evenings chatting about our favorite books, TV shows, and sometimes even delving into deeper topics about life and our dreams for the future. It was nice to have someone to talk to and share the space with. Despite our different schedules, she worked from home, and I had a 9-to-5 job. We managed to find time for each other. Sometimes, I'd come home to the smell of freshly baked cookies or a new dish Anna was trying out. Other times, we'd order takeout and have movie nights, laughing and commenting on the latest thriller or rom-com. For the first few months, everything seemed perfectly normal. Anna was the ideal roommate, considerate, friendly, and easy to live with. Our apartment felt like a safe haven, a place where I could relax and unwind after the stresses of daily life. But as time went on, subtle changes in Anna's behavior began to surface, and the comfortable routine we had established started to unravel. The first signs of Anna's strange behavior were subtle, almost imperceptible at first. It started with her becoming more withdrawn, spending long hours in her room with the door closed. I didn't think much of it initially. Everyone needs their alone time. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice other oddities that made me uneasy. Anna would often murmur to herself, sometimes late at night when the apartment was otherwise silent. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but I could hear it through the thin walls. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone, though I couldn't make out the words. I dismissed it as her talking on the phone, or perhaps just a habit she had, but it still left me feeling unsettled. She became increasingly distant, avoiding our usual chats and spending most of her time either in her room or out of the apartment entirely. When we did interact, her responses were curt and devoid of the warmth I had come to appreciate. The friendly notes stopped appearing, and the atmosphere in the apartment grew tense and heavy. One night, I woke up to the sound of faint, rhythmic tapping. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from the kitchen. I got out of bed and crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the kitchen, the tapping stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I peeked around the corner, but the room was empty. Everything seemed normal, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, I found a knife lying on the kitchen counter. It wasn't unusual for us to leave dishes out occasionally, but this knife was different. It was one of the larger, sharper ones from our knife block, and it was placed in a way that seemed almost deliberate. I shrugged it off, assuming Anna had used it and forgotten to put it away, but a nagging feeling of unease lingered. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps echoing through the apartment. It was an eerie, rhythmic pattern, like someone pacing back and forth. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. As the footsteps grew louder, I realized they were coming from the kitchen. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew I had to see what was going on, but every instinct in my body screamed for me to stay in bed, to ignore the sounds and hope they would go away. Gathering all my courage, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and slowly stood up. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I winced, hoping the noise wouldn't give me away. I crept down the hallway, each step feeling like an eternity. The closer I got to the kitchen, the stronger the sense of dread grew. The air seemed thick and heavy, pressing down on me like an invisible force. My breath came in shallow gasps, my palms slick with sweat. As I reached the entrance to the kitchen, I hesitated, gripping the doorframe to steady myself. Peeking around the corner, my eyes widened in horror. There, standing in the dim light of the kitchen, was Anna. She was holding several knives in her hands, their blades glinting ominously in the faint glow of the overhead light. Her posture was rigid, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight ahead with a vacant, almost trance-like expression. Her lips moved rapidly, but the words were incoherent, a steady stream of murmurs that sent chills down my spine. "Anna," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of her murmuring. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my presence. Her hands moved methodically, almost mechanically, as she sharpened the knives on the edge of the counter. The sound of metal scraping against stone was unnervingly loud in the silence of the apartment. I took a cautious step forward, trying to get her attention without startling her. "Anna, what are you doing?" I asked, a little louder this time, my voice trembling. Her head snapped towards me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by that same glazed, vacant look. She continued murmuring, her words becoming more frantic and disjointed. The sight of her standing there, surrounded by knives, her eyes empty and unseeing, filled me with a deep, primal fear. "I'm fine," she said suddenly, her voice low and monotone, just lost in thought. But it was clear to me that she was anything but fine. The way she gripped the knives, the unnatural stillness of her body, the vacant stare, it all pointed to something far more disturbing than a simple lapse in concentration. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I knew I couldn't leave her like this, but I was too afraid to get any closer. The sight of the knives, so sharp and deadly, made my skin crawl. I took a step back, trying to think of what to do. My phone was in my room, and the thought of leaving her alone, even for a moment, filled me with dread. But I had no choice. I needed help, and I needed it fast. As I stood frozen in the hallway, watching Anna sharpening the knives with that eerie, vacant expression, I knew I had to do something. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and called out to her again. "Anna, please talk to me. What's going on?" My voice trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Anna didn't respond. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, the knives scraping against the sharpening stone in a steady, unnerving rhythm. Her murmuring grew louder, more frantic, the words still incomprehensible. It was as if she was trapped in her own world, completely oblivious to my presence. "Anna, you're scaring me," I said, taking a cautious step closer. "Put the knives down, okay? Let's just talk." She continued to ignore me, her eyes glassy and unfocused. The sight of her, so lost and unreachable, filled me with a deep sense of dread. I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. My safety was at risk, and I needed help immediately. Backing away slowly, I made my way to my room, my hands trembling as I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. When the operator answered, I quickly explained the situation, my voice a frantic whisper. "Please, you have to send someone right away. My roommate is acting strangely." She's got knives and I don't feel safe." The operator assured me that help was on the way and instructed me to stay on the line. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me, my eyes darting back to the kitchen. Anna's murmuring had escalated into a low, guttural chant, and the sound sent chills down my spine. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every creak of the apartment amplifying my fear. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens growing closer. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The situation was far from resolved. When the police arrived, I rushed to the front door, waving them inside. They moved quickly, assessing the situation with professional detachment. I led them to the kitchen, where Anna was still standing, surrounded by knives, her murmuring now a frenzied scream. "Anna, it's okay," I said, trying one last time to reach her. "The police are here to help." But Anna's reaction was immediate and violent. She screamed, a piercing, inhuman sound that made my blood run cold. The officers moved swiftly, attempting to restrain her, but she fought back with a strength I didn't know she had. Knives clattered to the floor as they struggled to subdue her. "Stay back," one of the officers shouted at me, and I obeyed, my heart in my throat as I watched the chaotic scene unfold. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to wrestle Anna to the ground, handcuffing her and securing the knives. Her screams turned to sobs, a heartbreaking sound that echoed through the apartment. As they led her out, she glanced back at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. The police assured me that she would get the help she needed, but the look in her eyes haunted me. I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with a mix of relief and lingering terror. The ordeal was over, but the impact of that night would stay with me forever. As the police car drove away, taking Anna to a place where she could no longer pose a threat to herself or anyone else, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. Whatever had happened to Anna, whatever darkness had taken hold of her, it had shattered the sense of safety and normalcy in our home. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The images of Anna with the knives, her glazed eyes, and her anguished screams played over and over in my mind. The sense of dread lingered, and I knew that my life had been irrevocably changed by the events of that terrifying night. In the days following Anna's arrest, the apartment felt eerily quiet. The police had assured me that Anna was receiving the help she needed, but I couldn't shake the image of her vacant eyes and the chilling sound of her screams. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at the slightest noise, and I struggled to sleep, haunted by the events of that night. A few days later, I received a call from one of the officers who had responded to my emergency. He explained that Anna had a history of severe mental health issues, including schizophrenia. She had been managing her condition with medication, but recently she had stopped taking it, leading to a psychotic episode. The knives, the murmuring, and the glazed look in her eyes were all symptoms of her deteriorating mental state. Hearing this, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief that there was an explanation for her behavior and deep sadness for Anna's struggle. I remembered the friendly, calm person I had first met, and it was hard to reconcile that image with the terrifying figure she had become. The realization that she had been silently battling her own demons all this time filled me with a profound sense of empathy and sorrow. Despite knowing the reasons behind Anna's actions, the trauma of that night lingered. Every time I walked past the kitchen, I could still see her standing there, sharpening the knives with that vacant expression. The sound of footsteps in the hallway would send my heart racing, and I found it impossible to relax in the apartment that had once been my sanctuary. I decided to seek therapy, hoping to process my feelings and find a way to move forward. Talking to a professional helped me understand that my reactions were normal, a natural response to a deeply traumatic event. It was a slow process, but with time, I began to regain a sense of control over my life. However, some nights were harder than others. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events over and over. The feeling of dread would creep in, making it difficult to breathe, and I would find myself checking the locks on the doors and windows, needing to reassure myself that I was safe. I eventually moved out of the apartment, unable to bear the constant reminders of that night. My new place was smaller, but it felt safer, a fresh start. Yet, even in this new environment, the memories would sometimes resurface, catching me off guard. The trauma had left an indelible mark, one that I would carry with me for a long time. As time passed, I found ways to cope. I took up yoga and meditation, finding solace in the quiet moments of reflection. I reconnected with friends and family, leaning on them for support. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent, and I began to reclaim my sense of peace. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious, more aware of the fragility of the human mind. I kept in touch with the officers, occasionally checking on Anna's progress. Knowing that she was receiving the care she needed brought me some comfort, though the sadness remained. In the end, I realized that finding peace was not about forgetting what had happened, but about learning to live with it. The events of that night had been a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, and it taught me the importance of compassion and understanding, both for others and for myself. Even now, as I continue to navigate the aftermath, I hold on to the hope that both Anna and I can find our way to healing. The journey is ongoing, and while the shadows of that night may never fully disappear, I've learned that it's possible to find light even in the darkest of times.